Welcome at the Maxon booth here. On the IBC in 2014, we've got a great lineup of presenters here, and this one is no exception. He was a DJ a long time ago. Like me, I was a musician. So it's nearly the same. It's artistry. And he worked on Luc Besson's Fifth Element. He also worked on Terminator Salvation, so big movies he worked on. And now he's at Side Effects, and he's a senior creative consultant at Side Effects, doing a lot of great stuff. And now he's given us a glimpse of his work. Welcome, Mr. John Courte.
Thanks, Glenn. So what I'm going to talk to you guys about today is procedural technology across the production pipeline. And that's a really fancy way to say, let's get rid of all the redundant work. Okay, let's make processes and machines and software do the stuff that keeps you from doing art. Now, my title is Senior Creative Consultant, and then that means something different from what it is in the advertising world. What I do is I teach facilities and individuals how to spend more time making art than managing data. And when I started out doing this, it was as Glenn mentioned, I was a DJ, and from being a DJ, I got into music software. And from music software, I got into programming and figured out if you connected certain MIDI interfaces to certain other plugins and other things, you could make this really cool sound. And it was very interactive and very interesting. And then, you know, same as Glenn, I said, hey, I got to make a living. I got to figure out what I'm going to do with myself. And I saw a video clip of SIGGRAPH 1992 on the television, on the news, and I said, okay, I think I want to do that. And a bunch of friends of mine and I got in a rented minivan and drove to California, and the rest is history. And some of that history is very, very blurry indeed. So let's talk about the basics of what this is going to cover, okay? Proceduralism is not that hard to wrap your head around. All it means is that you are interacting with processes instead of data. The procedures handle the data. Okay? There are four pillars of this. There's proceduralism itself. There's Houdini and the node-based workflow, because you can't talk about proceduralism without talking about Houdini. And then there's the concept of the Houdini Digital Asset, which can encapsulate a procedural workflow into a single node that can be used throughout your pipeline. And then there's the great jailbreak, which is Houdini Engine. Houdini Engine allows you to use those Houdini digital assets in other softwares. And that's going to get really exciting. So Houdini is the original procedural 3D toolset. Houdini has been around since about '97, and that's when I started using it, 1.0 on Roland Emmerich's Godzilla. And apologies for that. So that became my tool of choice. That's what I began working in. And it is still, at its core, a very intuitive way of working with very complex concepts in geometry creation and animation. But evolving from that, the original procedural 3D toolset became the ultimate effects toolset. And by effects, we mean particles, and we mean destruction, and pyroclastic effects, and all kinds of things where these effects interact with each other, and you're essentially setting up this giant simulation environment to simulate very complex things. And that is currently one of our major strengths. We have contributed to a lot of projects all over the world. And, you know, rather than just listen to me talk about it, I'm actually going to show it. And this is our demo reel for 2014. Whoops, how about if I... There we go. Do we have audio? There it goes. So at the end of this video, the credits will roll. So if you're curious about who did any of the work here, it'll show. And you can also find out more about this on our website at www.sideeffects.com. So that's a little taste of what Houdini does on its own in the real world. And this year, we've partnered with Maxon to bring this Houdini technology to Cinema 4D. And this is going to be really exciting. And I'm stoked about it because after seeing Glenn's presentation on Cinema 4D and the ease of use that it gives you, to be able to do this inside of Cinema 4D is going to be really, really cool. So, bringing this into Cinema 4D, it's going to be interesting, and there is going to be some setup on the front end inside of Houdini. But proceduralism gives you a lot of power, and the basic question is, we want to do a lot of repetitive stuff, but it has variation on that repetition. We do not want to do that by hand. To put it plainly, I don't want to see artists managing data. I want to see artists doing art. And at some point, we're going to hit a wall. We're going to hit a wall with content creation because the demands on content creation right now are more extreme than they have ever been. And they're only going to get worse. So there's no way you can sustain the model of throwing more bodies at a project. That's not going to happen. You can delay the end for a while by offshoring, but that's ultimately still not going to be a viable model in the future. So proceduralism is the way to go. Right? The rule sets are becoming clearly defined for how to build things like cities and how to build things like terrain and even clouds and rendering. We're all doing physically based rendering here. Okay, there's physically based rendering and there is art driven shading, but these systems are becoming mature. So now we can put these systems into procedural processes that the artist can make use of, but doesn't have to think about. And that's what I'm getting at. Now, computers are excellent at doing that. Computers do what you ask of them, but you have to ask them to do something. You can either input data by means of a stroke of a pen or something like that, or you can make the rules. And I prefer to make the rules because that's just me. So the second pillar of this talk is Houdini itself. And Houdini's core is the node-based workflow. And the node-based workflow is a flow of data. Data flows from one procedure to the next in an order of granular operations. And you can see this elsewhere. You can see this in Nuke, and you can also see it somewhat in Maya's flow graph. And if you've ever used node-based shading, such as in Unreal Engine, you know exactly what this looks like. So what it looks like in Houdini is this. You have your inputs, which is data fetched from somewhere else, and each one of these nodes does some kind of process to it. Now, what happens in your viewport is changes that you make in the controls of these nodes are reflected in the viewport in real time. And what that means is there is no construction history. The data is always live. Upstream changes affect downstream results. Okay, now that's not to say we have no undo. There is plenty of undo. And the undo basically covers you, the operator, from doing things that you may not have meant to do, right? But as far as the actual process of how that data happens, nothing is baked here. It is always live. And it is essentially a modular synthesizer for 3D geometry and everything else that Houdini covers, which is character animation, lighting, rendering, simulation, dynamics, everything. So the node-based workflow, like I said, should not be all that strange. Over on the left there is Algorithmic Substance Designer, which is a real-time material authoring solution. And the Substance Engine is integrated into several products. And what that means is that you can create these procedural materials and they can render in real time in other places. Their node-based workflow, very similar to ours, right? And the new kid on the block over here is the Unreal Engine version 4. And they have their blueprint system, which is very much the same as any other node graph, right? It's a series of interconnections that handle logic and geometry and other types of arbitrary data. So, you know, the data, the rules, the inputs and outputs, these are all dry computer science terms that really don't mean a whole lot to an artist. An artist wants to work. An artist wants to get into the viewport and start doing things. So what do you do with this? You've got all these little nodes, and you've got to be clicking on the nodes and moving all the sliders around, and that's not the most artistic workflow. But what we can do is we can actually encapsulate that node network into a single node with a set of these sliders and also viewport handles. Right? So what you've got then is a self-contained tool based on that node workflow that you put together, and that is now portable. So we call that the Houdini Digital Asset. And the Houdini Digital Asset is a file type that contains one or more tools or procedural models, and that is easily portable all around your Houdini pipeline. It can contain embedded textures and geometry, such as guides and reference maps for generating content, right? Custom handles as well, things you interact with in the viewport. You can also contain full rendering pipelines inside one of these things. So this spaceship here, it would be just as easy to add a render node and put the render button right there in the control system for the asset. As with Houdini, everything is scriptable. You don't have to do coding or scripting, but it's very useful in Houdini because once you learn it, you can use it absolutely everywhere. So as an example, here's our window maker. This was done a couple of years ago for Unite in 2012 that was over there in Wester Park. And our intern decided he wanted to make building tiles, right? So the way you do a game is you have your objects and you try to have as few unique objects as possible, but they repeat. They repeat, but they vary. So this system was a quick little tool that he put together so that he could make a lot of different windows for a modern European city for the game level he was building. So I'll just show this video real quick here. So it starts out with some very, very simple geometry. The simple geometry defines the boundaries of what you're going to start working with, and everything else comes from the node graph within. So you've got a texture map, you've got some extrusion, this is all procedural. This is very similar to the stuff that Glenn was showing, but this was done 2 years ago. And the really important thing to remember about this is there was not a single line or lick of code written to do this tool. Now the back end of this tool also allows you to batch process variations, right? You set one of the parameters to be some kind of variable, and then with each frame rendered, it changes to be a different set of windows. So then you can go through this asset library of window panels, wall panels, and choose the ones you like best. So there are combinations for different materials, placement of windows, texture maps of the building, positions of the curtain. So what you've got in the end is you've got this really versatile thing that you can use all over your virtual city, and it's really cheap. The game engine's fine with it because you've still got, at the end of the day, fewer unique objects. And all the controls he needs are right there in the parameter view. So this is the same as Cinema 4D's attribute inspector. But you can customize the attribute inspector on one of these digital assets as much as you like. And you can load this thing up, or you can strip it down to the bare minimum, or all you need in it is a control that the user moves around in the viewport. So once again, we've got a tool here that was compressed into a single node, and that can now be fed to anywhere else in your Houdini pipeline with its custom parameters and textures and handles and everything else. So, you know, we're looking at this thing going, this is great. I can take this and I send this thing that my advanced Houdini user created, and I can send it to the 50 junior Houdini artists that I've got working in my shop on this project, and we're going to bang this thing out, and it's going to be awesome. And that's great. That's great when you've got 50 junior Houdini artists. The reality of the situation is that a production pipeline often is composed of many different platforms, many different tools, and many different skill sets. So this great stuff that we can build in Houdini, We can't use it in Cinema 4D or Maya or Max or After Effects or Nuke, right? Well, that's where this all changes. And that's where the Houdini Engine comes in. The Houdini Engine is the fourth pillar of the system. And that allows you to use the Houdini Digital Asset file in any 3D, in any third-party software that has a plugin architecture that has a plugin for the Houdini Engine. So now what that means is we can use Houdini assets in Cinema 4D. And next up, I've got some examples of what that looks like. Well, actually, let's go through some technical basics, right? The Houdini Engine is a C API. It's around 100 C calls, and that lets you get into the core functionality of Houdini. And what you want to do is you want to load the digital asset file, you want to get and set from the asset's user interface, and you want to access the results that that asset creates. All right? So you want the benefits of the procedure, and you want to bring that back into your host environment. And not only that, you want to be able to take things that you've made in Cinema 4D and feed them to Houdini assets so that they can be processed or replicated or had procedural operations done to them. So I've got a few examples. The first one, of course, is Cinema 4D, because this year we have partnered with Maxon, and they are actually doing the development. The technical documentation and the API is open to the public, right? So if you want to write a plugin for your particular application, go for it. All you need is a relatively inexpensive Houdini Engine license, and you can implement this in your pipeline. So this is a video of Cinema 4D running a Houdini asset that was downloaded from the Orbolt asset store. Now, during this, I'll talk a little bit about Orbolt because it's a good place to get Houdini assets to start. It's like you don't have to be a Houdini expert, and you don't have to start with a blank page. You can go to the orbolt.com asset store and pull down some of these assets and start working with them right away. You can tear them apart, and you can examine how they're built. No restrictions whatsoever on that. Most of the ones on that store right now are free. But it is also a place where you as an author and an artist can contribute to the asset community, and you can use these assets in your own productions, and you can expose them to others as well. So what we're looking at here is a combination of procedural modeling and Houdini fluid simulation. So that little blob on the top there, that's the fluid simulation. That's a particle fluid simulation similar to the way RealFlow works. But because it's Houdini, it integrates with all our other dynamic systems. It integrates with our fire and rigid bodies and other destruction, and also any physical model you have in the scene. So in this case, I'm in Cinema 4D, and I'm doing exactly the same thing here that I would be doing in Houdini, right? I've got some parameters for the properties of the simulation, but the difference here is I'm able to use Cinema 4D shading and materials to render my stuff. And this is just a quick example of an asset being used in Cinema 4D with the early alpha plugin. And like I said, expect this from Maxon this year. They're still working on it. And when it comes out, it's going to be integrated right into Cinema 4D, and it's going to give you all the ease of use that you expect from Cinema 4D. So we also have a version for 3ds Max. And this one is being done by a third-party developer who just picked up the tech docs off the net and said, I'm going to build a plugin for 3D Studio Max. Because if you go to our website, if you go to our forum, there's a sticky form at the top that says, where would you like to see a plugin implemented? Of course, Cinema 4D was #1, 3ds Max was #2, and we were already working on Maya and Unity. So this is essentially the same thing in Max, and it's going to look very similar. The workflows are very similar. In this case, you load the Houdini asset from a menu, and you're able to bring that in and see that in your viewport. Now, it takes a bit of time here, but again, it's the same thing. And this is using 3ds Max's viewport global illumination, or ambient occlusion. And once again, we've got our fluid simulation there. It's the same blob, right? And it's the same procedurally generated fountain. And the important thing to get here is that no matter what application I show you this in, it's going to behave the same across every single one because it's accessing Houdini's core functionality. The look is going to be consistent, the look of your simulation. And this is super important in a pipeline, right? In a pipeline, when you hand this off to somebody in lighting and rendering, and they might need to run the sim based on feedback, you want them to be able to do that. And you want it to look the same. You don't want the behavior to change just because the platform has changed. That's extremely important, and that is what the Houdini engine enables. So as with Cinema 4D, he's able to change the rendering properties of this, because at this point, that's a 3ds Max object. But it's still a Houdini simulation, because we're accessing the core Houdini functionality. And the good thing about this is you are preserving your workflow. You're not going too far outside your comfort zone. You get to stay and work in the application at which you are most proficient. There we go. So now he can render this scene right out of Max. He can send it right to V-Ray or Arnold or whatever he's using, and it delivers a look that is consistent. And in this case, the caching works. He's not resimulating that. So he's going to pick a good frame, and then he's going to render it out. And that's Houdini Engine in 3ds Max. So another game engine we're working with is Unreal. And Unreal is becoming the real-time engine of choice lately because possibly something to do with that $19 a month subscription. And what you're seeing here is another Orbolt.com asset. And this is one of our favorite test mules because all it is a series of procedural extrusions with all of the extrusions set as parameters. All right, so this is the asset. This is the Houdini asset interface. You would see that in Houdini. You would see the same thing in Cinema 4D, and you see it here in Unreal. And the important thing to remember here is that now that it's in your host application, it's treated like anything else in your host application. Whether your host application supports meshes or NURBs or polys or volumes or whatever, it doesn't matter. The rule is if Houdini can support it and your host can support it, you're good to go. It really makes that connection to advanced effects techniques and procedural technology really accessible. So by far the most advanced plugin that we have is the Unity plugin because that was our test bed for the development of the Houdini engine itself. And earlier this year we partnered with Ozone Interactive and they have built a suite of tools for use in Unity that is all about building racetracks. And you can buy this bundle off of their store and their site, and you can also go to their site, gametutor.tv, and they will teach you how to build it step by step. But what this is a series of Houdini assets that are run by a custom GUI in Unity.
Calibrations. Calibrations normal. Check. I have the deck report. Drive tape ready. Drive tape's ready. Clock synchronized. Clock synchronized. Air bumpers check. The air bumpers check. Okay. Guess we're all set. Oh, and over. Hold down here. Yes, we're all set.
So what you saw there was a very good example of how you can take procedural assets, use them in a third-party context, and then wrap a complete artist GUI tool set around it. And this is the Unity workflow, right? There was some scripting done for that, but it was all on the Unity side, and it was all in service of making that user interface. And that connected all of the different Houdini assets together, and everything's running natively inside of Unity with Houdini Engine. So we at this point, we're trying to figure out what's next, right? You know, where do we go from here? Is there a plugin for my favorite? Well, as I said, the tech docs are available, and I'll pop up the URL for that. And we have a lot of requests. I mean, you can really implement Houdini Engine in absolutely anything with a plugin architecture, including Photoshop, including After Effects. What I'd really love to see are some of these asset acquisition and management systems around here implement Houdini Engine so that motion graphics people can have procedural assets at their fingertips. That would be really cool. But partnering with Maxon has been a great thing for that. These guys are going to have the Houdini Engine implemented, and we're really excited about our collaboration with them. So look for that coming soon. So that is going to wrap it up for me. I want to thank you very much, and I really like to thank Maxon for inviting us to speak, and have a great show.